So welcome to the Node.js package maintenance team meeting for March 10th, 2020. We'll follow our agenda, which was in issue number 324 in the repository. Before we get into the issues on the agenda, does anybody have any announcements or are there any information that they'd like to share?
We'll be running an open RFC deep dive tomorrow from the NPM side. We actually have an open issue for the agenda there. It's going to be a deep dive on workspaces. So we would just like to welcome everybody here if you can join. It's at the normal time that we run our RFC calls at 2
Which
p.m.
is, sorry, 2 p.m.
Eastern.
Okay. Okay, any other information?
I'll share a link as well.
Okay, sounds good. Any other information or things people would like to share?
There's no such thing as normal time daylight savings.
Right. I assume that's, yeah, 2 p.m. daylight savings, which it's especially fun since I think much of Europe isn't switching for 3 weeks now or so. So anyway, any other announcements or things to share? Okay, let's move on to the things tagged for the agenda. The first one is number 321, shared CI configurations. I think that Dominikas, you opened that one, right?
Indeed, I did. Right, so we have a couple of questions there. And I think that the primary one, the primary one is what do we name the repo and how do we structure it?
Right.
And I am very keen to get a decision on that sooner rather than later because, yeah, I just want to go and start using it while we can.
I guess the first thing is one repo versus multiple repos, right?
Yeah, we did discuss that a little bit, although I didn't get much discussion on the issue itself about that, so I'm not sure. So we said last time around, we said we're going to open the issue and see if there's any discussions there. But right. I don't think that happened yet.
So it's, I mean, yeah. So Node.js, so I guess like one always, putting on my sort of org management hat, less is always easier than more, but that doesn't mean that more isn't the right answer if we think that it's the right answer. So the benefits, I guess, are if there are different repos, people can clone just that repo, right? As opposed to having to clone multiple things. Are they going to be
so, Travis, you probably wouldn't be cloning. You would probably be just referencing the include. I don't know, for GitHub Actions, I think you also referenced the organization, right, /repo. If you want to include something.
Have you tried that with the matrix stuff yet, though? I haven't seen an example where it's the matrix is defined in
an include
action like that. I mean, it might work. I haven't seen it.
I haven't.
Example. Okay.
I haven't. That's why I think. But also at the same time, like when you reference GitHub Actions, the official ones, you just include a repo organization /repo, right? You can you reference a subfolder?
I don't think it's a subfolder. I think you can only reference like git specs, right? So like a tag or a branch name.
Right. So that means that it would have to be a separate repo if we wanted to. So I think that sort of leads to an answer.
Well, it could be a separate
workspace. It's a single repo.
Right.
Sorry?
So you could have like an orphan branch where all the stuff is in the one, but then you do a release and you could cut an orphan branch to keep them.
Yeah, I think
that sounds pretty yucky.
That would be hard to explain to people. I mean, beauty is in the eye, right? But
hey, I just got a Slack message from Jordan. Can you promote him? Sorry, I don't.
Yes, sure thing.
Oh, yeah.
Done. Yeah, I mean, if it's that the references are really just an org repo and that's what you can do the includes on, then that seems like a pretty compelling reason to say we actually need a repo per, because while you could work around that, it just seems as Dominique was saying, hard to explain, harder to use, much less clear what's going on. You know, if you could say org repo / file, then it would be something different.
Are we talking about shared configs?
Yes.
So yeah, with Travis, you can have them in all one repo if you want. So I have my Travis CI repo and I have a node folder, and I built it that way specifically because I can put a folder for any other platform in there. And Travis lets you reference by path as well as by branch name.
Yeah, we're discussing that GitHub Actions, they don't necessarily work that way.
So GitHub Actions did not allow a path, you're saying?
If you are referencing an include, I don't know how the snippets includes work on GitHub Actions, but if you're referencing a template, the thing that you say with something, you need to reference org repo.
Okay.
But this could also be something we bring up with them and say, look, we're trying to figure out what the best way forward here is to support both. They were really responsive on their GitHub issues. I haven't seen them be super active since it sort of launched, but I mean, they're still working on it. So we, you know, if we raise it, maybe they'll get back to us and say, oh, no, there's totally a way to do that. Worth asking at least.
Are there other, so that's one reason, you know, we could ask and find out, are there other reasons we prefer multiple repos?
I mean, just having the README only have one set of instructions, right? I mean, just for like a simplicity of a new user perspective, but that's maybe not super valuable.
Just thinking of other, like, you know, because we can write up an issue asking for the repos, just be good to say, and here's our rationale for multiple versus one. If there are other solid, other reasons, but I mean, because for example, there were lots of repos in terms of the internationalization. There was basically a repo per internationalization. I guess the other aspect might be, you know, do we see different teams maintaining each of them? Because it's, you know, again, if you have different repos, you can set up the access control differently.
Yeah, that was the other issues, is that you could have different maintainers and you'll probably want to have different maintainers for different things anyway. So commit access here is easier.
I think that's another good thing to call out, that, yeah, we could see that in this case, the people who maintain the Travis one may not be the same people who maintain the GitHub Actions one, and you might want to have different teams. And yeah, okay, that makes sense. So it sounds like the preference is for multiple repos, and there's a couple good reasons. Like the maintainer one, even if we could figure out with GitHub Actions, and even today we're not sure we could do it. So the next question was names. Was that? I think you proposed some names in there.
Yeah, I just said ci-config for the meta, and then ci-config-travis or ci-config-provider for the rest of the stuff. Let's keep it simple. What are the chances that something like CI changes in a concept or becomes more abstract so that the name becomes a hindrance? I don't know, probably likely.
Those are renameable. And I think GitHub does the redirects for you too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, probably not a major issue there, I suppose, yeah. Okay, I just quickly checked the Circle CI, and they have imports. They call them orbs that you can import. And the examples that they give, they are org/repo. So yeah, I don't know if you can reference something from deeper.
Okay, so it seemed from that perspective, it just seems multiple. Separate is safer. Okay, so which ones would we be asking for to start with?
So I do not have enough information on either of GitHub Actions or Circle CI. I'm familiar with Travis, and I think Jordan said he's volunteering to maintain that as well. So may as well start with Travis and the meta one, right?
The meta one is for discussion on
across everything. So my thinking was that it would be useful to have a way to sort of have a common shared layout, but we probably can't do that, given that things like GitHub Actions and Circle CI, they want the whole thing to be a repo. So for Travis, it's fairly simple, right? You say include, and then you give it a file name, and the file name can say something like all LTS versions starting with 6, right? So you say that in the file name, so like latest -min6. Whereas for something else, there would probably have to be a sort of a different convention. So I don't know how we'd solve that. That's why actually starting with a meta discussion about how, what goes into a repo and what are the rules
we should
there.
Definitely do that. And part of the reason for that is for both GitHub Actions and Travis, and presumably everyone, you have a branch identifier. Typically, you don't point to like a version release, which means your master branch has to be backward compatible forever. So whatever structure we agree on, we like effectively are committing to doing that for eternity. So we should be very careful.
I mean, that's if you don't follow what GitHub recommends you do. That said, GitHub recommending you to do this on Actions is sort of weird, and it's hard, I think, for most folks to understand what's happening. So people might do it wrong, but I assume we could do it right, which would at least never have anybody using master. They'd always be using a versioned branch.
And we could recommend that, but given that the default and the easy thing to do is to pull it off master, I feel like it's wiser to treat it that way, as that you can never bump the major, which is fine. We could always make a new repo as a trivial way to do that, but it seems like it's useful to have very careful consideration about our structure and like our aliases and wording and stuff before we do that, so that all of them can be the same, and so we never have to make, we ideally don't have to make massive changes to them.
I guess my question was, do we need like another repo for that discussion, or could that happen in the package maintenance repo? Like, is it a big enough topic, an ongoing topic, that we should have like a whole nother place, or is it just doing it here? Fine.
I suppose we can always link back to package maintenance from each individual README, so that people know to come here with extra questions. Or so yeah, maybe that's right.
Has the new GitHub discussions thing, does that support organization level discussions?
We've been able to do that for a long time based on GitHub Teams.
Yeah, Teams supports that.
So we could do that now if we wanted, regardless.
Okay. So do we want to ask for 2 just to show that the 2, like, config, like, what would the second one be called? Git config GitHub Actions, or?
I think they just start with 1 though. Maybe it's a better approach.
Or like, we only have to create, like, I'm just wondering, does it make sense to ask for, hey, we want to cover these ones, so these are the names we would like the okay to do, rather than going back, then later saying, oh, we want a new one. We could get the okay for a number of them and then just do one at a time. I don't know. I'm just thinking it might show more of the pattern that we're putting together, is like, yeah, we're going to have like three repos or 4 repos or something like that in the end.
I mean, if we have an idea of the services, like you said, if they're just going to be bare repos and then we start with one, build up the template and copy that over, at least you just have the repos when you're ready for them.
So yeah, I don't feel super strongly, but like we could ask for both CI config Travis and CI config actions or GitHub actions. I don't know, what would we call it?
Probably has to be the full name.
Okay, so like this, I'll paste it in the chat just so that. Does that make sense? Okay, any other things to talk about on that topic before we move on? The one thing we'll need to make sure is that like when we create them, that we put in appropriate licenses and stuff like that, the MIT license and contributing and oh, what's the other one? The
Code of conduct.
Code of conduct, exactly, yeah. Okay, if there's nothing else, we can move on to the next one, which is governance models and methodologies for maintainers. That was Owen, right?
Yep. I can help quickly summarize if that helps. I had a comment towards the bottom.
That'd be great.
Cool. So yeah, so from the original discussion, yeah, it was the issue was created to try and see if there was a way similar to how we were talking about CI earlier. Are there cross-cutting concerns that could be that the package maintenance team could kind of help set, for lack of better words, standards, practices, recommendations across some of the various, responsibilities of maintaining a package. And so with that, I took some time to look into all the existing content within the repository. There's a lot of surveys and some responses from projects and already some good documentation in there. So if one wants to scroll down towards the bottom, my final comment in the quoted section was essentially proposing, well, here's a speculative table of contents that could act as a governance document. And so what I was wondering was, could we use that? Well, what did folks think of the topics themselves in the issue in terms of, categorization, organization, too much, too little, but also not wanting to reinvent the wheel since there is a lot of existing content in the repository itself, some of it in draft form, some of it not. So there's a couple options. Could we, is the governance maybe just more like an index.md that is this table of contents and then just links to individual docs? Is there, is the governance documentation its own spirited discussion that can kind of delegate to more specific topics where needed? But mostly just, at least just wanting to get some feedback on organization and structure and topics in general, and then maybe some thoughts as to how to go about, stitching it together, either brand new or reusing what's existing. And secondarily, would there be any harm in maybe sending out more surveys, even if just to pool more information in terms of what topics are most relevant to teams right now, if there's one that bubbles up more than the other? Yeah, so I guess just more or less just looking to get some feedback, and then I'm happy to run with putting things together based on feedback of others. But definitely wanted to point out, because I didn't realize there's already a lot of good content in there. So kind of how do we want to present a governance documentation alongside some of the existing content that's already in the repo, if we want to do something like that.
Yeah,
so I have who went? Sorry, go ahead.
No, so that's probably something that's missing when you actually look at our repo. What people want is this is how you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And this probably fulfills that. And the question really is perhaps not do we need this is how you do it, but how do we structure that this is how you do it and link into the other things? Because I absolutely think it, because you have to like drill down to all the little bits of markdown we have.
Mm-hmm.
I think like in the docs directory, something like this would be a great index.
Mm-hmm.
And then with links to some of the existing ones and filling in, like you've certainly got other areas which we haven't covered. Like, I don't think we've made recommendations on a code of conduct, but I think having that, like as a maintainer, here are the general list of things you have to worry about, and then here are the links of the resources we have would be very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to say, I think this particular issue has gone to two very specific topics, both of which I think are good, but I think are actually two separate topics. So one is having a table of contents that is like a starter guide that lists all of the different resources we have, which I think would be great. The way I originally read this issue, though, is a different thing, which is having specific guidance on things like contributing, code of conduct, governance structure, right? Like it says governance models. So I was thinking of things like how Node says its governance is, here's a document that outlines what Node's governance looks like. So when I was working on doing the Express application for the foundation, they had a bunch of examples, and that was really helpful for me because I had no idea what to write, right? So I just copied and pasted a bunch of things together. If the package maintenance working group had a similar set that maybe could be just pulled straight from the, or linked to it, in fact, I don't know, the foundation documents, I think that would help. But I definitely see this as like two separate topics that we should maybe discuss independently.
Agreed. I mean, anybody have any concerns with adding an index? I mean, that could just be, yeah, we agree that's a good idea. Okay, you could fork that off as the other discussion, and then we could dig into the second one, which Wes pointed out.
Sorry, just to clarify, this index is supposed to link to documents that we have already or that we're going to have, or is this supposed to be like a checklist?
We have a number of documents already in the docs directory, so it could point to some of those. I think it doesn't need to be one or the other. It could also be, in some cases, here are some things you need, and if we don't have any resources, then there aren't any links.
Yeah, there are some gaps, which I am happy to help. So there's some in draft, some out of draft, and then some that would be missing. So coming up with that index would then give us a set of checklists internally for, where we have things, spruce them up, supplement things. And yeah, also the advantage is there that you can then just share this one document with everybody, and then they can kind of cherry pick what is of interest to them instead of, having 15 different links. So it sounds like the index is a good idea. Maybe, also, yeah, I guess maybe Wes, could you, just for my own personal knowledge and from your experience, if you were to put together like a couple high level topics for a governance doc that's different than this, just to help give me a good direction to run with there so I don't bleed the lines again?
Sure. So I think when I think of governance, I think of not necessarily code things all the time, just how a project is run.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I see you're good. I think
just navigating there, like when you go into this repo, there is a
there's a governance doc.
Yeah. So right, I went past this. So there's a governance doc, contributing doc, code of conduct doc. These kind of fit into like, and this one says like, okay, what are collaborators? How do people become collaborators? Who's the technical steering committee? What kind of process do we use to make decisions?
Okay. So it's,
And
more
so-
around.
And so like, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I was just going to add to that, like the having some templates. So where I see this, our value add, right, would be having some templates to say, if your governance style is benevolent dictator for life, here is a document that you could copy and paste into your repo to codify benevolent dictator for life governance models. If your governance model is governance by technical steering committee with a dissent, based thing or whatever, I guess, I don't know how you paraphrase what nodes is, but, here's the document you could copy. If you want to, create your own, here's a few examples of, ones in the community you might want to read over and pick from. Like that's where I see us adding a lot of value, would just be having those links sort of all in one place and a few templates provided.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and even the upfront discussion of what the different common models are, because it sounded like you'd looked at a bunch of different projects, and it's like, okay, they probably fall into like 5 categories or something, right? And then having a template for each of those categories, that's a good resource for sure.
So it would be more the self-organization of the people and the technology rather than the day-to-day operations per se, a little bit, or?
Well, it can cover both. So I think a good start would be just to go read a couple of these documents, because when I did that, it really there were things I knew about these projects, but just reading their governance doc really helped understand a bit of the structure, right? So like, for example, in the Express one, we call out specifically, there is a technical committee that if anybody has any issues that they dissent on and can't agree upon, those issues would rise to that level and be voted on, right? And Node has a very similar thing. But I think if you were a new project and you had no foundation, right? Say you just had I didn't mean that in the OpenJS Foundation. I meant like you don't have these kind of documents set up yet, right? It would be helpful if you were like bringing on new contributors, if you didn't have to spend hours researching, how do I have a technical committee? What does that even mean? Is there a definition that I could just follow? So it is day-to-day running, because that's how you run the project, right? Like we have this group and that group meets, and just like we have a group that meets, and although we don't have like technology decisions to make per se, we have sort of a governance as outlined, I think it's just in the README, right? It's kind of like, what do you do? What is in your domain? What is your
yeah, we don't have one. We're not formally a working group. Any of the Node working groups need to have one that says, here's our governance in terms of like how you join the teams and stuff like that. But there's no reason why we couldn't. You're right. We did capture some of that in the README in terms of like how to join and stuff like that.
Gotcha. Okay, no, that's really helpful. So it sounds like I can take that comment we were looking at and siphon that off to a new issue just about the organization of the docs and content in general. And then I've got some good next steps for just the governance side. So that's very helpful and definitely makes sense.
Okay, anything more on that discussion?
Just, I guess, for not that everybody has to answer right now, but would also be curious, just thoughts in general on the items and topics and organization of that sample table of contents. If there's anything missing, too broad, things are in the wrong place or anything like that would also be helpful. So we can all work on that together. But for in your free time.
I'll add my 2 cents. I think it's a very good start. I'd almost suggest just like submitting a PR to the docs. Like think about it in that context, maybe tweak it a bit, but then submit a PR, because it's easy for people to make suggestions and comments, and that probably will get us to something landed sooner than later.
Sure. Yeah. If that's works, then happy to do that. Sure. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, I'm just taking a few minutes, a few notes. Okay, so the next issue is baseline practices, keeping dependencies in Node up to date. This is number 280. This one, Dominikas, you opened it.
I'm wondering, why did I add the label? It was before the last meeting, and I think it was related to the CI setup, which we extracted into a different issue. So I'll just remove the agenda label. I don't think that there's anything from my perspective to cover there unless somebody else has any input.
Has anybody started a document on this, or because it does seem like that is the next step, right? Like,
which document?
Well, like to start a document, because right now all we have is
I have a pull request open on keeping dependencies up to date, which is not Node itself. It does reference Node and how you do that. So I have a doc open for that, a pull request open for that. There are some pending comments there which I have to address, but otherwise, yeah, feel free to add something there.
Okay, I might not have time super soon, but I have been working on an internal doc for how we're going to do this, and I'm sure I could copy and paste things out of that if there was, you know, a place to put them. I'm not. To be clear, I'm not volunteering on starting the doc. I don't have time for that, but I'd be happy to.
The doc is started, so you just have to rewrite everything.
I took the minutes I took as Wes is working on internal doc, we'll write new doc. No, may have time to add some ideas into the existing doc. Is that fair enough? Okay, I see some nodding. Okay, next issue is PKGS org for WG supported tooling. Right, so let's see, we created the issue. I know there was some discussion going on there. I think I tagged.
I don't think the TSC didn't have, or it was in the admin group, but I don't think anybody had any strong opposition. They just had questions on why it was necessary, right?
Right. So yeah, I tagged it before the last TSC meeting because I don't think we've got quite enough discussion. So we canceled the last meeting. The next one is tomorrow. So hopefully we'll have some discussion there. Let me just double check it's on this agenda. Yeah, we haven't heard. I mean, Tierney's had a number of questions. I haven't heard like major opposition or anything, but maybe in like the in-person discussion we can get a little bit more clarity on. Are people just like, yeah, not commenting because it's fine, or there's, you know, or there's any concerns that are slowing it down? But,
I agree. It's a little hard to say, but I also would be interested to know if this group is like super behind this, because I know Dom and I have been committing to those repos, but not everybody else has. So, and I know Darcy, you mentioned you're in support, if nothing else, just to house the NPM init creation stuff. But nobody else has commented on this issue. So either support would be helpful, or good dissent for why, you know, maybe we could do this, the same thing we're doing today and achieve it in a different way inside the node org.
that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't have strong feelings either way. So long as code of conducts, like everything is well defined or carries over from the existing like package maintenance working group, or I guess we're not even a working group is what I found out just now. So
yeah, we're a team. I mean, day to day, it really makes little difference. The main difference is a working group is formally delegated responsibility for something. Whereas as a team, we're just getting together and working on something, and we haven't been delegated responsibility from the TSA, but really doesn't make a difference.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I think that's also an important distinction in the perspective of the separate repository, because it is the same as, you know, getting together and writing some code versus being delegated a responsibility to actually produce certain things in the name of the foundation.
Yeah, it just kind of blurs the lines if we create some set of tooling and then write a blog post on the Node blog about it. Like, is that essentially blessing that tooling? And then, yeah, when does the experiments become, or that org, anything that's living in that org or owned by that org, become so popular or so, you know, dependent upon that, then, you know, there's a concern in how we're operating or what, you know, I don't know.
Would it help to resolve that concern if we made some explicit governance doc that said at a point where this, you know, we deem this popular or dependent on enough, we would move it into the node org and it would be considered more stable, and or something like that, where we could still keep the nice experimental nature where we're doing sort of, you know, working out the details of what we might be working on, but still have, like, I think somebody mentioned having like a graduation step.
It's a bit of a funny line in that, like, we have, so for example, there is a fork of the main node repo for Quick. So it's in the repo, but there's not necessarily going to be any confusion that that's not experimental and subject to change and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's.
I think the other concern I do have there of putting it into the node organization is discouraging people from competing with it. Because once you put something in an official node repo, they will say, oh, well, node has this and I don't need to build this, or I don't want to build this. I don't want to compete with it because they have the whole foundation behind them, which is not necessarily true, right? Whereas package.js is something like, you know, we're playing with this, maybe this will spin off into
some point where we want to graduate and it to become what we think people should do. I agree, we don't compete too quickly, but eventually that's the whole point of this endeavor, is to have something that people can follow that would be blessed. So I haven't got strong feelings on like Darcy, where we put the stuff, but eventually the outcome of this is, well, we have a way, we can go into Express, we can help out, we can triage, we can have repo captains, we can go in, we can do it to Axios, we can help out projects, and there is a blessed methodology with an index.md for contributing and so forth and so on, that people can follow. They don't have to follow it, but all we can say is, oh, we tried this and it worked. At some point we graduate.
So I guess what I'm sort of, it's maybe subtle what I'm disagreeing on. So in general, I think, yes, I like that having some methodology that we've said, yes, it works, is good. Where I see this org going in a slightly different direction is some of these things might be sort of tangential to that process, right? So if you look at what we've put in there now, like, I think the status board really has nothing to do with that. I think detect node support might have something to do with that at some point, right? If we end up having some way to automate adding, you know, keep checking which things go, which, you know, which test and which versions. But like today, I would say it probably has nothing to do with the, we've tried this and it worked, right? I put a couple of repos in here. Envy, I think, is one where maybe we do, because I mentioned to Jordan, I've been in the NVM repo trying to get some actually cross-cutting support for these aliases. I think would help folks. but like pretty much the rest of it, no. I don't know. I don't see ever a reason why this would quote unquote graduate to, you know, no thing. Future things maybe, but I think what's in here today is a pretty mixed bag.
Yeah, I mean, as we were talking about, it's kind of like, at what point will, you know, if it's another org owned by the node project, do you get that if that's truly the concern, you're in the same ballpark, right? Like it's kind of hard. Like we want to take advantage of the benefits of being part of the larger group, but not some of the things that come along with that in terms of like, well, it's because we're leveraging, you know, the code of conduct, the moderation team and all that. The other thing that comes along with it, people look at it and say, oh, well, the node project's working on that, so it's got a little bit more credibility, right? But I'm not sure in the end, will it be any different, right? If there's lots of stuff in there and there's lots of activity, it's almost the same thing.
And to be clear, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like having a bit more credibility is actually a good thing, because if you look at what this group might produce, the hope would be that it would be of materially better, maybe not quality, but support, ecosystem friendliness, following best practices. And if you compare that just to the average random repo you might find, in theory, we should produce something a little bit more standardized.
Right. Yeah, I guess I'm like, I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other. So we've got the issue. We'll try and get some more discussion in the meeting tomorrow and see if you know, the TSC members are like, yeah, that's not a problem, we should just do it, then we can take it from there. Because I mean, I can see in terms of like the node project, you know, having different namespaces would almost be useful in some cases, but you know, you sort of go into here, you know, you like I almost wonder if we had like a Node.js experimental namespace that adds in the, yeah, it's tied to the node project, but this is all experimental stuff, so you know, it's something like that, and then that's a more generic concept that would maybe be applicable in other cases too. I don't know.
Is there no metadata teams tags that we could be using on projects though that could identify those things? So like a tag on a Geb repo, experimental, explicit.
I don't know if
like
there's something like that. There's certainly a README for everyone, which should make it clear, you know, what the repo's for. And we have quite the range, like from internal tools that we just use ourselves to generate meetings, to things like NAPI that we use to, you know, the Node add-on API, which is something that people actually use in their applications, to internationalization repos. So there is quite the range, and you need to look at the repo to kind of understand how well you think it's going to be that, or how much activity is there, because there's not really any commitment to anything, right?
Yeah, what's the criteria for starting a project inside of the node org today?
It's basically you open a request in the admin repo saying, I'd like a repo to do this.
And there's no like barrier to entry there in terms of that request?
It needs to be approved by, or it needs to not be objected to by the ComCom and TSC. So, you know, those members look at it and say, is that, you know, fitting with what we're doing in the project? So if it's something that is either a group already working in the project, it kind of makes sense. If somebody came from outside and said, I'm doing something completely different, doesn't relate to Node, I think they'd probably say, doesn't make sense, right?
Is that, sorry, is that documented anywhere?
It
Michael?
is.
I
Let me
apologize.
find that, and I can paste it into the chat.
Okay.
Where are we? Organization, right.
Because it seems like it would make sense that even if we did decide to continue down the road of our own org and we still want some sort of graduation process, we're going to eventually reference this doc. So we'll still have to pass this criteria or whatever this is.
Yeah, and like if we have a new org, it's probably the same, and it's owned by the Node.js project. It's exactly the same thing that would apply.
Well, I'm trying to steer away from that. Like if we're going to be a separate org, there's no reason that we have the same exact government. It just doesn't make any.
Well, the proposal, sorry, the request of the TSC was another org under the project's auspices, because the ask was for like, can we get it to be covered by the moderation, right, and the code of conduct, and you know, as soon as you're asking the project to own it, then it's going to need to have something that says, well, how do you, if you want to be a different org, you're a different org, you can do whatever you want, right?
So yeah, so I don't know what the ask is really then differentiating between asking, like if we have to jump through the same hoops to create a package in package.js org, then we haven't unlocked any new capabilities for like experimental projects.
Right. I mean, I guess that's something where we could then ask that the approval of creating a new repo in this org be delegated to the package maintenance team. Maybe we'd even say, well, can we be chartered, and that's part of what's there. So yeah,
just
I
want
guess
to be mindful of that to make sure that we
Right.
follow up, because I think you'll be leading that discussion, right?
Yeah, so you know, you're right that it would be, it's more than just we want another org in the project. We want another org and then some extra rights delegated effectively to that org.
Yeah, I think that's the differentiation. And or some rights within the existing org based on a certain set of criteria. Like, again, maybe we go through this process and like that experimental project has to be prefixed with like a certain experimental key or something.
I think it would be great to add in a set of alternate proposals to this discussion before the meeting. It would be, I think the best addition that I've heard would be, instead of PKGJS, creating a node experimental or some, you know, variant of that, because that to me speaks more broadly to the project. And I think that might actually get people more on board and have more applicability, more value in the long run. That said, I do think if we don't have the ability to just create random repos like we've been doing, it does still come back to the roadblock which we were trying to avoid. So
I think there should be some friction. A little bit of friction is, I think, okay it's really, but less with the experimental. Yeah.
Like this, if you look in there, it's basically as long as nobody objects, it's 72 hours.
Right. But yeah, I think I sort of brought this up the last time I think we talked about this, which was, you know, I think it would be better if we changed, like, it's better if we create something that's cross-cutting, because this isn't a unique problem to this group.
I agree. And I would actually be fully on board if we just changed the whole request to be, actually, we'd like to make a node experimental thing and move things like the quick work into it, and anything else where, you know, it's not quite ready for prime time. I think that would make a strong argument too. So
okay, I'm just typing that into the issue itself. Okay, I'm going to say from the discussion in the package today. Another option we have is or name node experimental, which could house the projects the team had in mind, as well as other projects. Quick repo. The concern is to make it clear that the contents are not sort of officially blessed or something. Or
can I point out one other thing that maybe is sort of questionable here so again, maybe we choose not to move all of the work that exists in that PKGJS, because I think that would be a good idea if we went with this proposal. Mm-hmm. But also, wouldn't this delegitimize some of the work where it might be like not experimental, but it's just not node.js, right? Like this is like a shared CI config. You could make a strong argument is not node.js, right? It is not part of the node.js project. It's just we're a group of folks who under the node.js project have decided to make a shared CI config, right?
I think it's community related, right? Like everything that we're doing is, or all the conversations that are brought, I think in this working group, this team, I don't know what to call us, this team, is community focused, which I think has a place within the node org, right?
Yeah, because we want to support those things. Now we also have the OpenJS org as another potential if we thought for some reason that made sense. Now the only concern there is if like we want the moderation and stuff, I don't think the OpenJS has an active moderation team that watches the repos as much, right? Because there's less there. I mean, it's mostly governance today, and the projects have their own repos where they've got that in place on their own.
Sorry if this this has already been stated and I just missed it. What is the objection to having it be a separate GitHub org? Like, what's wrong with package.js?
It's just gonna be accountable to the exact same rules restrictions of the
Sure.
node
So it's just like another folder in a repo. It's an organizational tool. What's wrong with that?
Well, I'm just wondering if that's limiting, if we're gonna have to do that for each working group, right? Like is this now standard practice now that you're gonna spin up a new org?
I mean,
for each
I don't
working
think this
group
is,
to create?
I mean, I think a slippery slope argument doesn't have to hold if we just say this is what makes sense for this specific working group, because this one, unlike most of the others, is dealing with the ecosystem and not Node directly. Whereas almost all the other working groups are dealing with Node in the ecosystem, right? And like, so this is a unique case. The version management working group deals with Node, right? It doesn't deal with NPM modules. Right?
Yeah, but things like readable stream, are they Node?
Right, but Node uses that.
But Node could potentially also utilize something that we're building, right? Like status
Yeah.
for example, would be.
If we build a tool that Node starts utilizing, then at that point it should be transferred. It's probably be transferred into the Node org. That's also easy to do. GitHub maintains all the redirects, like that, and that is the correct signal. That means at this time and not prior, it is now part of Node instead of just being something that Node people are managing separately.
Yeah, so I think we've discussed that as well in this conversation, right? Like maybe it makes sense to outline what it looks like to promote or bless or like have something be brought in. That's why I asked specifically for what the criteria was for something to be brought in, right? Like it's like, what's the gating factor? And maybe it's exactly what you're saying, right? Jordan, maybe it's Node actually consumes this thing, right? And that
I think that's the answer. Whether consumes is ships as part of the core, or whether consumes is uses as part of the build process. I mean, when Node can't work without a tool we've built, it should be a Node tool. But when it's just people that use Node that benefit from those tools, then like that's part of our purview more than Node cores.
Yeah, it's a good distinction.
Sorry if some of that was rehashing. Thank you for bearing with me.
No,
Yeah.
I think it's clarifying.
It's still a fuzzy line because, like, say the Travis CIs that we're going to ask for, Node doesn't need that to build, but it is good for the ecosystem. So I still think it's a fit.
I mean, you can make the argument in lots of directions, right? But like, I mean, NVM was never permitted to join the Node Foundation because even though it was part of the ecosystem and a good fit, there was worry about blessing tools, and there was worry about, well, it's not actually Node core, and so on and so forth. And this to me feels similar in that, like, if Node core is not consuming them, then like whether you can make it work or not, I mean, it's the burden of adding an organization, a GitHub org is like a few extra clicks. Right?
Yeah, I want to make sure that it's like I'm very aware of what I can and can't contribute, or what we can and cannot contribute to the Node org for whatever reason, right? Like if that is a gating factor and there's you have to meet X, Y, and Z to put a project into the node org. I just want to make sure that's outlined in the docs, right?
Yep. Like this, well, this is the doc that the one I pointed you is the one that, and beyond that, it's a judgment call on.
Yeah, like I'm not seeing anything.
Like, does it fit, right?
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything that what Jordan just said, like in terms of consuming, like the project has to be consumed.
There's no requirements for any of that. I mean, the discussion back to NVM, it was more like, you know, it's kind of different between like the team, the community's building something for use, you know, like I guess we're building things because we don't see a solution to it that's out there, and we're making those available and we need a place to do it, is different than pulling in one of the 3 competing options, right?
I think it's also helping to set a standard and define good practice. Like that's what we're trying to do here, which essentially is saying, you know, come to this table and you can help define what those standards are. And this table is in some sense blessed by the node org. So then those standards and whatever tooling should also get the same level of.
I mean, I think there's a danger in if we're part of the node org, that we want the standards we come up with to be adopted, not just because we're recommending them and because it's better to have a standard, but because they're better standards or they're good standards, right? They're good fits. And it's impossible to avoid some boost from being somewhat tangentially related to node or from the collective credibility of the folks of us that are involved in it. But like ideally, the things we come up with survive on their own merits and not because of any affiliation. And being in the node org, I mean, how many of there's probably more of Airbnb's projects than I want to admit that did well because they were under Airbnb's GitHub org, and not necessarily because they were the best solution. I hope they're the best solution, but like, you know, it would be foolish to deny the PR impact of that. And I think that here we have the opportunity to develop things in, you know, with less of that artificial boost, you know, to kind of validate to ourselves that this is in fact the right solution. Because at the point where we move it into the node org, it's done, right? Like it's there, and now it's common.js and it's there forever, right? Like it's a thing. So like, you know,
I'm not in a, like I'm fine with us asking for the separate org. I just wonder if eventually it's going to be the same thing.
I mean, if so, then we can transfer all the repos in and archive the org, right? Like all the redirects will work, and you know, it will be as if the org never existed, right? But that's a bunch of ifs, and in general, I find it easier to consolidate than to separate. So I would prefer to err on the side of over separation.
Right. Okay. So, but I think we'll have see what the feeling coming back is. Like I can see just looking at a little bit of the comments, some of the pushback is like, well, if we really think this is an issue, we should have spilled up a bunch of other orgs, right? So why is this different? So
I think that maybe it is the right answer, right? Maybe they should have been split up. I've said this before, but the node is huge. At some point, you have to organize things, or else you can't find things.
Yeah. So no, I mean that's. And in this case, like if we think we're going to be creating a bunch of repos, you know, that could be a good reason, right?
I got to run. I'm not sure if anybody else is at time, but I can carry this on in the thread itself.
Yep, perfect. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Good discussion on that. I'm just going to take. Will be discussed in TSC meeting tomorrow. Good discussion of pros, cons. So I don't think I'm going to add that comment about the alternative node experimental, because after our discussion, I don't think we really agreed that made sense in the end, right?
I think so, yeah. Even though I said I'd be on board with it, it does sound like maybe that's not the right way.
Yeah, because I mean, I think we quickly get to the point where it's like, well, this really isn't experimental. It's just so okay. we have 2 other issues tagged, but we're out of time. So document current top 10 Express issues and next steps on level and package support for package JSON. Is there anything we need to mention on those before we close out? Okay, I think otherwise let's leave them. We can get into more discussion on those for next time. And thanks for everybody for taking the time to participate, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.